afternoon, and welcome to the Global Manufacturing and Industrialization Summit, virtual edition virtual edition digital series and virtual summit. My name is Tariq Taira, and I welcome you to today's topic on hydrogen, a pathway for energy transition and the decarbonization of industry. In today's session, we will be examining various aspects of the role that hydrogen can play in the transition to low carbon economy and industry. A brief introduction about myself. I will be moderating today's session, and my name is Tariq Taira. I work as a director for the Department of Energy at the UN Industrial Development Organization, UNIDO. For those that are not familiar with our work, as one of the specialized agencies of the UN system, we work extensively with developing countries on inclusive and sustainable industrial development pathways, and of course, mainly the challenge of delinking manufacturing from negative environmental impacts. Chief among them, of course, is CO2 emission, as a key priority for many of our member states. Hence, the topic of hydrogen and its potential role in contributing to addressing this challenge of delinking industry and industrial development from climate impacts is not only an interest for the work we do, but also to our member states and our collaborating partners. Joining me today in this conversation, a distinguished panel covering perspectives from industry, government, and research. So let me start by welcoming Ms. Rebecca Macero-Mole, who is the Chief Director of the Hydrogen and Energy at the Department of Science and Innovation, South Africa. Among Rebecca's many responsibilities is the implementation of the Energy Grant Challenge to address and inform national priorities and policies for stimulating national energy technology capabilities. Rebecca also leads a team that focuses on enabling the widespread commercialization of battery, fuel cell, renewable, and net zero carbon technology based on public funded intellectual property rights program. So it's a pleasure to have you with us, Rebecca.
Thank you.
Joining me also, please join me also in welcoming Mr. Charlie Ratan, the CEO of Charlie Ratan Associates based in the UK. Charlie is active as a business advisor and trainer with many years of senior level experience in the offshore wind industry. Currently, Charlie is advising on international development and mentoring large-scale global and innovative projects involving fuel cells, offshore electrolysis, and the next generation of fixed and floating wind turbines. I came to know about Charlie through his informative series on hydrogen heroes delivered through the Green Power Academy, where you can get also first-hand account of the new hydrogen economy, a practical guide for market entrance. Welcome, Charlie, to the session.
Thank you very much.
And lastly, joining us, Mr. Leon Stille from the Netherlands. Leon is the Managing Director of the Energy Delta Institute. He's responsible for the daily running and long-term strategic guidance of the Institute. And the Institute is also part of the New Energy Coalition, NEC, in the Netherlands, that brings together research, academia, and industry in collaborative ventures to accelerate the clean energy transition in the Netherlands and global. So Leon is also a lecturer for renewable gas and energy transition topics. And currently he's moderating also a series of webinars on energy transition and the impact of the coronavirus through the New Energy Coalition. So happy to have you with us today, Leon. So let me start by providing some context, and then I turn to the distinguished panel for further discussion on the topic. So as we know, the commitments under the Paris Agreement emphasize the imperative for zero carbon energy. This requires making strategic decisions on energy infrastructure and the use of available energy resources. Hydrogen has emerged as an important part of the clean energy mix today, as part of the clean energy mix needed to ensure a sustainable future. There is a growing sort of indication of falling cost for hydrogen produced with renewable energy, coupled with the urgency of cutting greenhouse gas emissions, has given hydrogen unprecedented political and business momentum. So we see quite a tremendous hype around hydrogen. Part of that promise, let's say, is that hydrogen has the potential to revolutionize the current energy system toward cleaner, secure, and sustainable pathways, given its diverse characteristics from production through utilization. Hydrogen is also seen as a clean fuel or an energy carrier that is emission-free upon utilization, with water being the only byproduct. So there's a large sort of, let's say, political talk on the hydrogen economy or the hydrogen society becoming a replacement fuel for its fossil fuel counterparts, example, replacing oil and gasoline for mobility, coal and natural gas for power generation, and also could present a viable storage medium to stabilize the intermittency of renewable energy. So there's quite a strong sort of many variables in which hydrogen is being positioned as a promising solution to the diversity of challenges facing the clean energy transition. So having framed some of these promises, let me start and turn to my distinguished panels, and I would like to start with perhaps Charlie to give us a little bit of perspective on, despite all this promise, where are we actually in the formative stage of developing a hydrogen market? I mean, are we actually?
Like you were saying, Tarek, there's certainly a lot of talk about hydrogen at the moment. I'm a party to that myself. There are strategies almost on a daily basis. We've had the recent United States roadmap for a hydrogen economy. There's a hydrogen strategy being drafted in the UK. South Africa, I think, is starting to come to the fore, but we've got Germany, Europe, France, Spain, Portugal. Everybody's talking about hydrogen, but where are we? Well, it's been around a long time. It's been around for 200 years with William Murdoch, and hydrogen was always in town gas in the UK. We'll come back to that in a moment. It's had some bad press. Everybody talks about the Hindenburg. It doesn't take long to be in the hydrogen community, and the Hindenburg, very dramatic pictures come to mind. But it's an industrial gas, and people are used in industry to dealing with explosive gases. It's got a few quirks. It's only a third of the weight of methane, which is natural gas here in the UK, and it's explosive and burns without flame or odour. So there are a few quirks to it. If you were to look at pure efficiencies, I think some of the nuclear proponents of their technology are aghast at some of the efficiencies from hydrogen in itself. So they don't quite understand why hydrogen is getting such a good press at the moment. But sometimes it's important to look beyond just the figures. It's been called something of a Swiss Army knife of solutions. It is around a long time in the UK, and that's good news. It means the existing gas grid can largely use hydrogen. So you don't need a new grid, certainly not in the early stages where it's going to be perhaps up to 20% of the gas network will be from hydrogen. So you don't need to rip up the entire infrastructure. You just need to modify it, modify the pipelines, line it. Hydrogen's got a different molecular structure, so you need to make sure it doesn't escape. It can cause embrittlement. You need to deal with that. And then a lot of things at the either end, the valves and the gauges, and then the appliances. And here in the UK, we've got a 4-point plan. That's quite common in a lot of these strategies. Number one, is it safe? Well, that's just been tested at Keele University with High Deploy 1, and the answer is yes. It's not a surprise to those of us in the industry, but it needs to be proven. Then the next step will be High Deploy 2 in the UK. That's a real world testing of real appliances in a real community up at Winlaton in the northeast. The real prize, and one that I'm engaged with, is the supply chain for High Deploy 3. That's a regional rollout. It'll probably involve things like carbon capture and storage, which is another form of hydrogen. There are various forms, I'm sure we'll explore that today. But also, interestingly, from renewables. There's the big offshore wind farms here in the northwest of England, and the longer term kind of trajectory is to move from the blue, which might be steam reforming from methane, you can get it that way, or electrolysis. Hydrogen is the most abundant element in the universe, but it still needs a bit of getting from the hydrogen and oxygen is water. The splitting of the two is called electrolysis, and a good way of doing that is renewable, but it can also be done by conventional fuels. So it's a known quantity. It's not cheap, particularly at the moment, but the fear or the hope in the UK is that if we scale it, then we can have the same benefits that's happened from offshore wind, which is an industry that I'm involved with. So it's a very interesting point. And High Deploy 4 is the national rollout. So if High Deploy 3, the regional rollout, goes well, and the Northwest here is a front runner, then there'll be a national rollout. And that's what people are now talking about. That's why there's so much noise, not so much High Deploy 1, which is the test, but a couple of years down the line when we're looking at High Deploy 4, going into the national grid for pipelines for gas.
You mentioned, Charlie, a few of the opportunities related to, of course, immediate opportunities to deploy hydrogen in the gas grid and other infrastructure projects. I want to actually turn to Rebecca and from her position driving innovation and transformation in the South African markets toward diversified energy mix. Where do you see opportunities for using hydrogen as a clean vector for industrial decarbonization, and where do you see the challenges for realizing those opportunities?
You know, I think I was listening to Charlie. He was talking about hydrogen being an abundant molecule, and we say in South Africa that we see hydrogen as a flexible molecule. You know, and I think that where we see its great value is around its ability to couple different sectors of the economy. I think in South Africa, and I'm speaking from even South African, almost an African-centric context, is, you know, we have rural communities widespread. And if we're going to really, there's in a developing point of view, you're still going to be rolling out a lot of infrastructure. And when you're rolling out a lot of infrastructure, that's cement, that's steel, that's other things that you need for rolling out roads, be it bitumen. And essentially those are what we call hard to abate sectors, is industry, cement and so forth. So moving, and you know, like I say, iron and steel sector, you need a bit of carbon to still process your ore and so forth. So you're not going to necessarily go with straight, you know, renewables. You actually need hydrogen. You're going to still need carbon capture and use. And I see it as transitioning us out of, you know, coal and natural gas through to renewables, but carbon capture and use as a part of the process. You know, we just, even in South Africa, we're still in the process of building 2 of our coal-fired power plants, which will be with us for quite some time. So we see hydrogen as an input into carbon capture and use for carbon lean fuels, be it you know, be it 0 ppm diesel and other products that can come out like fertilizer. But then also, I think that if we decarbonize the iron and steel cement sector and couple it with green transport, you know, transport is the second largest greenhouse gas emitter in South Africa, you're going to see maybe some buy-in from different colleagues. Like I said, we would like to do electric vehicles maybe in city areas, but in rural areas or when you have regional transport, hydrogen is probably the best technology. Hydrogen vehicles are the best technology, but then also heavy duty trucks. When you're moving, the mining sector is a critical part of the economy. So moving our, you go towards smart climate mining, you can move your ores through the, on the roadways through, you know, through heavy duty trucks. And then I think for me, when you really look at the transition, I think that if you, I think back in the minds is that hydrogen is here. We're using it in the oil and gas sector widely. We're using it in the industrial sector widely and so forth. And even, you know, speaking to blue hydrogen, you know we have chloroalkali facilities which are venting hydrogen at tons a day. However, we can't use it unless we have innovation like coated catalyst membrane that can help you clean your hydrogen to get it to the state where you can, use it in fuel cells. And we have chlor-alkali facilities near some of our airports. And we know airports where you have around the clock usage of materials handling is an appropriate application of fuel cell technologies that can take. So I know in South Africa, like I said, we understand the fact that we don't really have the same level of infrastructure as you have in UK. However, we see a situation where you need to couple practical applications across regions and ensure that you get economies of scale. And I think we're only going to get economies of scale if you go across the country. So we have one project that we're working on called a Hydrogen Valley, looking at a mine in a platinum mine in Limpopo province, and then coupling the, using fuel cell vehicles in mining as well as heavy duty trucks to move that ore along the highway across our airports, driving up past airports, industrial development zones in Gauteng, the next province, and then all the way to KZN, KwaZulu-Natal, where we have ports where you can actually take the ore and export it into other countries. So this project is commencing this month, and it's a private-public partnership to look at how we can really bend the mind and bend the imagination around deployment of carbon technologies. And this is not with a prescriptive approach that we must use green versus blue versus gray, but this is with saying, how can we work together to really change how we do manufacturing mining in South Africa?
I mean, let me thank you, Rebecca, for outlining many of the opportunities actually, and that they are actually out there, industry might be working on. But are you seeing the kind of investments flowing into capturing these opportunities, or are you seeing the kind of partnerships that are crowding in the necessary financing to get this infrastructure in place?
Well, I think part of the reason, you mentioned that we embarked upon a Hydrogen Society roadmap, and like I said, we're about 2 or 3 months into the process. But what I think is important to know, as part of that process, one of the key components of that document will be a chapter on low-hanging fruit. And low-hanging fruit are those projects where we know different pockets of consortium are working on different projects. And our job as government is to facilitate discussions to ensure that these partnerships can come together in one large consortia to get economies of scale. And then also as part of the Hydrogen Society roadmap, will also be basically an indication of the near-term and medium-term barriers, be it regulatory, be it cost, that need to be unblocked to make sure that those, I would say, investments, both from private and public sector, can be made. So let's say, for instance, our Department of Trade and Industry and Competition, they actually have funding for infrastructure. And hydrogen refilling stations is considered infrastructure. But you just need to make sure that private sector submits a proposal that is coherent and clear. But you can submit a proposal, but if you don't get economies of scale, you're not going to get payback on the rollout of that infrastructure. So that's why we're trying to do this regional innovation project, so that you can get scale from, it's 3 different provinces. I think it probably would take you probably about maybe from Limpopo through to KZN, probably about 7 hours to drive from the ore and so forth. And then also another thing is, we know that even from a transport point of view, in Limpopo province, the transport for buses is actually regional hubs. So you fuel in the morning, you go out, drive a few hours, and you always come back. So, and it's with all the buses. So we know that the way we're set up from our transport, or public transport, is actually very welcoming towards the, reducing the cost for infrastructure and for refueling. And then also in terms of partnerships, I think from an innovation point of view, we actually have been entering into a lot of partnerships on the innovation stream. So economies of scale also talks to kilowatt, megawatt, gigawatt scale, and it get very expensive. So we're doing co-proposals with many other governments in other countries on especially the hydrogen South Africa portfolio. We've always had an exchange of students. We've always had exchange of research projects, but now we're looking at working together on demonstration projects so we can get that a scale. And I think the issue around scaling demonstrations is critical because awareness is a big barrier. Again, I mean, to some stakeholders, they may see it the same as something implausible. But if you see people see it in action, it becomes more plausible.
Let me interject here and say, I mean, I also took note of one of the statements you mentioned on the fact that you're also looking at the entire possibility or range of hydrogen production, blue, green. And I think, let me go back to Charlie here, because I understand that the hype today on hydrogen is also the potential synergies that it can have with renewable energy. Yeah. So maybe you want to, just to give you a context, I mean, I was attending a workshop where Germany was presenting its strategy, and it was clearly saying that we only want to do green hydrogens. Maybe you want to help us understand that.
One of the below the surface debates is this blue versus green. Should the hydrogen produced from a steam reforming methane process, which is fossil perhaps derived, with a capturing process and then perhaps store it under the seabed or somewhere, or should we go from the outset and go straight for renewables? Electrolysis is electrically driven, and if your grid is green, or if you've got a green input, for example a wind turbine, then electrolysis can, in theory at least, work extremely well with it. And both the European and the German hydrogen strategies, to some surprise, have really gone for the green element. To add to that surprise, some of the biggest proponents are people like Shell, the oil and gas company, who one might think would actually prefer more of a fossil-based approach, but they've said, no, we want to go and support the green agenda as well. So a lot of the oil and gas companies are now going straight from a more or less a pure fossil background to green. And that transition, obviously, it will involve a degree of restructuring, a degree of pain, and a degree of cost. But that is helping drive the European strategy. But I think there's a feeling, if you're looking below the surface on both the German and the European energy strategies, that you will need both blue and green. So if you're in an industrial park already producing glass or cement or some of the things that Rebecca just mentioned, I think it's really impractical to say, well, overnight we can transition that to an offshore wind farm. Yes, it will happen, but it'll happen in time. So there's this phrase that I quite like, through blue to green. And so that is using the blue element as a transition. It sounds easy. Obviously, investors might be a bit suspicious if they are to invest in blue infrastructure and say, well, if it's going to be decommissioned in 10 years, why would we do it? So that might be an argument to be had. But I think there's a feeling that the German and the European hydrogen strategies gave such eye-watering figures that there's enough for both to go at. And I was with the American roadmap recently as well, and I think that's the same. I think the feeling is, yes, we'll promote green, but green's going to take time to come online. Germany's got an offshore wind leasing round, the UK has, Scotland has, Norway. But these are not going to be built overnight. They might take 10 years from project's inception to deliver it. And you need something quicker than that. And so that I would suggest is a pretty good argument for considering the carbon capture and storage and the industrial clustering and the sector coupling approaches to enable fertilizer industries, to enable glass manufacturers, to enable ammonia manufacturers to say, well, we can play our part. And we can also discover synergies there as well. Certainly with fertilizers and ammonia, there's very much a reciprocal long-term opportunity, and it would be foolish to ignore those, even from a green perspective, my own perspective. Clearly there's a role for blue hydrogen as well.
Okay.
Yeah, but also I wanted to just push the, this issue around the circular economy. I think there was some work that colleagues at the Department of Science and Innovation have been embarking upon. And I think we've analyzed that 2% of the South African economy is considered circular. And I think globally, 9% of the economies globally are considered an average circular economy. So for the South African, in the South African context, we're really pushing circular economy. And for us, going, I think, through blue to green would be embracing the circular economy within the hydrogen economy context.
This is a very interesting framing because it's actually important to bring it around, because I've been hearing there's a strong momentum around circular economy, but actually going directly to green hydrogen would actually overjump the opportunities to do this, what I call circular optimization opportunities that exist within industrial parks and industrial structures. If I can read correctly from the earlier comments, is that we do see a lot of momentum on hydrogen today, a lot of activities. But if we want to go to the mass market deployment and realize the ambitious roadmaps that are out there, I'm putting this question to both Rebecca and Charlie. From your own perspective, at least Rebecca, you sit on the government side and Charlie on the industry. What are the key regulatory barriers currently limiting the development of a significant hydrogen industry or market?
Me? Yeah, there are a number of them. I talked to John Clipsham, who was involved in perhaps the world's first hydrogen economy, which is up on Orkney, and he said that the regulation was the key to it. The regulations don't match with the reality. I suppose top of the process would be health and safety. Is it safe? And so that is High Deploy 1, which is just been finished in the UK and proves that hydrogen can be safely integrated up to 20% in a gas network. So the regulations on health and safety.
So what, just to pick on this, is that mean that the current perception of health and safety around hydrogen is misplaced, needs to be adjusted?
Yeah, the regulations were geared around another industry. They were geared around perhaps town gas 100 years ago. Okay. And once they happen, people don't think of something new coming along. It's not geared to, it's not as if the regulations are bad. They've been fit for purpose for 150 years. But do they reflect the new reality? So I remember John Clipsham up on Orkney telling me they had all kinds of problems from the regulatory side. Is it classified as a molecule? Is it classified as a gas? Is it an explosive? The health and safety regs don't match with the reality of it. And if you're trying to get a project away, you need to match the regs. But if the regs are not in place, how do you get a project away?
Yeah, so we need to upgrade our perception and health and safety regulation, particularly related to that.
They're number one, especially with the Hindenburg, very visible. I mean, it's not all hydrogen in the frame for that by any means, but in the public perception, it needs addressing. So there's a lessons learned piece. Well, was it the flammable material? Was it a set of circumstances? But you need to codify that. And that is happening in the UK and, of course, beyond, because obviously all these strategies predicate on that being successfully solved. The oil and gas industry already deals with explosive gases and things with corrosion and so forth. So that it's not new, but it does need to be put in place. And then you need to think along the chain. Here in the UK, the electricity, the wind farms, for example, the number one in a wind farm environmental statement is the production of electrical energy. That's almost paragraph 1 of every development. And now you're saying, well, actually, it's not. You're saying it might be production of a molecule. It might be production of hydrogen. We don't agree. Is that regulated? As somebody said, actually, the whole thing needs to be rethought here. Okay. So I'm not saying it can't be done, but certainly before you get projects into the ground, you have to meet the existing requirements. And if the existing requirements are not fit for purpose, it's going to take a little bit of time. And that's where we're at in the UK, unpicking that. There are groups working on it, which is the good news.
Okay, thanks, Ali. I want to come back to the speed of reform, but let me take an input from Rebecca on her perspective on what is needed from the government side, at least from the regulatory side, if we need to scale up the market.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I have three main points. One is coming from the innovation leg of it. One is coming in 2 specific case studies that I'm aware of in South Africa. So if you look at transport sector in South Africa, we classify fuels as transport fuels. So the usual suspects, petrol, diesel, are there. But, let's say, for instance, if you want to do liquefied natural gas, it's not classified under regulation. So hence the way it's costed at the pump, if you use it, if you get into an accident, you're not going to be covered for road accident fund and so forth, because it's not taxed in the same way. The same for hydrogen. It's going to have the same barrier. So that the barrier for liquefied natural gas which has been around for quite some years, and as part of demonstrations, has been there as a barrier to scale up, and the same is there for hydrogen, even for like power plants. Now, like I said, South Africa is a water scarce country, so hence for our coal-fired power plants, we had to use dry cooling versus wet cooling, and we use hydrogen for dry cooling. So as a result, because of regulations, barriers, issues of safety, you cannot store hydrogen on site. You have to use an electrolyzer to produce hydrogen right before you use it for dry cooling, which makes it probably slightly more expensive and so forth. Again, another barrier for safety. So I think that, and then even in terms of demonstrations, you can demonstrate technologies, but the road from demonstration to long-term demonstration, long-term becoming permanent, is that you can demonstrate, I think in South Africa, a demonstration for up to 24 months. And then after 24 months, you have to, pick it up. So I think if you've demonstrated something is safe for 24 months, and if you say, you put in place regulations and say, rationalizing, extending to permanent, I think that could be something that could help with, moving from learning by doing and learning to the next level. And then also if we can have I know there's some harmonization around standards and safety aspects. Maybe if there can be, we always talk about this, certain agreements that we put in place, and we put in place great agreements around trade and so forth. But if we can have similar processes or opportunities for standards, to maybe speed up the process of adoption of standards, possibly you can remove some of those barriers, especially if you're learning by doing and having best practice in place.
And maybe just to follow up on this again, back to Rebecca and Charlie. I mean, do you see that the process of standardizing and fine-tuning the regulatory regimes, if countries go about it on their own, or do you see a need for multilateral processes or collaboration across countries to get this seamlessly moving forward?
Yeah, totally.
From a UK perspective, it's slightly odd in that we've just pulled out of the European Union, which might have been a useful vehicle for some of these. But I'm sure that we will align with it. A lot of the power industry is already involved in setting up the European regulatory power network, so it stays involved, of course. So they will align to it. I think rather than have everybody involved, a working party has been set up here in the UK. There are various trade organisations liaising with stakeholders, trying to make it happen. I suppose the good news is that there is political will behind it, and if you've got that, then a lot of the problems can melt away. I've seen it happen in Scotland, where wind was backed by the government, and suddenly stakeholders became very engaged. And that's happening here in the UK. We want to be a world leader, and that's been reiterated in the last few weeks at the very, very highest levels. And we want to be a world leader for offshore wind as well. And because of that, it's focused the minds of key stakeholders, the grid, the Crown Estate, oil and gas authorities, and they're now thrashing out these regulatory kind of aspects that I mentioned from Rebecca. All this there's some weird anachronisms that I'm sure will be teased out and got rid of sooner rather than later. And I suppose once it's in place, then it will be reviewed regularly, harmonised with other countries. United States, they've got their own regulatory approvals, so we'll have to make sure that it's fit for global purposes. It's a global economy. It's going to go on a quantum level, and so that standard. I've seen it happen in IT, where standards suddenly help IT take off. It's not the most exciting part of IT to work on the standards, but if you're serious about a global industry, it has to be done, and it has to be done up front.
Thank you, Charlie. Rebecca, final word on the topic.
No, I think you can have wonderful standards, regulatory regulations and so forth, and they can also be harmonized. But the adoption in some cases one of the barriers could be understanding and the adoption and the implementation when you get them on the ground. So, you have, in most countries, you have a Bureau of Standards. And the question is, what are we doing to ensure that as these new standards are being created, that the bureaus in different countries are being taken along for the journey, so that once they are finalized, that they can implement them effectively? Because you can have an ineffective implementation of safety standards, have an accident, and then you've lost years of trust that you've built with key stakeholders.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Okay, the question to you, Leon, is following on the conversation we had on where are we in the hydrogen market. Do you see real applications today in industry where hydrogen is playing a substantive role in the decarbonization agenda, or when do you expect us to see a role for hydrogen in sort of in market terms, playing a significant share in terms of its potential as a promised decarbonization energy carrier?
Yeah. I actually think at the moment, of course, I figure you already know and discussed it before, that the hydrogen in that sense as a decarbonization agent does not play a significant role yet. I think all the efforts that we are doing also with the projects that we are doing with Heaven, for example, is aimed at getting that application ready and to make sure that industry, transport, all the sectors are actually taking it up. If you look at hydrogen at the moment, hydrogen is being used and produced significant amounts already. If I look at the Netherlands, it's 10 BCM, so 10 billion cubic meters of hydrogen are produced annually, but they are produced specifically only for refinery and for chemical production. So but these are of course not green hydrogen. This is made from fossil sources. But if we want to go and scale this up, then we need to start investing and start using this kind of technology. So I think that it will take at least 2 to 3 years before we finally see some real projects coming online. That's also what we are aiming at. And we hope that within 3 to 5 years, it's going to be significant. So that the scale up of the investment in, for example, electrolyzers, but also in the transport infrastructure and in the infrastructure that can use it. So the users, that people start using it then to a significant amount, that we can see it back in the primary energy mix.
So we're looking at
some time.
We're looking at what 3 to 5 years to see early stage projects coming into the pipeline, but from a end use market.
Yeah, scale up project actually. So now we see smaller type of pilots coming online. So we have a 1 megawatt project in the Netherlands as well, where we electrolyzer, where we start producing hydrogen. There are some transport projects in the UK. There's a nice project where they on a university campus they started blending hydrogen in the network. So and testing, of course, with how your home appliances can actually take a blended mix of methane, natural gas, and hydrogen. Some trucks, some buses. That's also, but we need to scale that all up to make it bigger, to make it more like we need it, so to say. And that's something that will take a couple of years yet.
I know that through the new energy coalitions, you're trying to also create the kind of public-private partnership to bring industry and different actors together on the hydrogen agenda. Sort of, maybe if you can just tell us a little bit, how is this working, and where do you see challenges in getting this to operate effectively in, say, a market environment?
Yeah. Well, to answer the first part of the question, yes, New Energy Coalition, we are a coalition. So the idea is that we bring all these actors together. Well, as you know, that is not always easy. But we do have, we are one of the, I think, 5 or 6 hydrogen valleys at the moment in the north of Netherlands. So we're one of the first that has been recognized and supported by the European Union. So we have a project called Heaven, or Hydrogen Valley, where we have 35 actors together from industry, from municipalities, from governments, all coming together for the full chain of hydrogen production, hydrogen usage, hydrogen transport, but also the policy barriers that are connected to it, that we bring it all together. And I think that's the key part. So it's complicated, but you need to get all these parts together because this is a new fuel. This is a new thing.
Absolutely, yeah. You mentioned policy barriers. Have you been able to map certain priorities from the government side where you think government should put their efforts and energy on?
Well, main thing is regulatory. So, of course, because this is a new type of fuel, that's something we are aiming at transporting hydrogen to significant amounts of hydrogen in the natural gas grid by reusing that infrastructure. But this needs to be possible. So, in a regulatory sense, this is not possible at the moment. So, this is one of the biggest barriers we still have to tackle, is that the government allows us to actually exploit and transport this kind of new gas or new fuel in the network.
Similarly, we just listened to Charlie and Rebecca, where they highlighted that maybe we need to upgrade our health and safety regulations, because that seems to be one of the key issues that is sort of blocking. We're dealing with an old regime of regulations for health and safety. That needs to be revisited. Is that coming also as an issue in this debate?
Yeah, absolutely. If I can, one very specific example is a municipality in the Netherlands that is part of the Heaven project, that they want to install a small grid of hydrogen. We want to connect housing to hydrogen, basically. But it does not, if you want to then apply for a permit to actually do that, then the word hydrogen does not come into the permitting. So it's impossible to apply for a permit for getting hydrogen in the grid and heating houses with hydrogen or with electrolyzer, because it simply does not exist. So the municipality does not know how to handle it. So now we circumvent that problem by putting it into a heat grid. So we say basically this is a heat grid. But that illustrates the point that usually governments or municipalities are a little bit behind in terms of policy and what is possible, while the technology is already further ahead. And that mismatch needs to be resolved before you can actually put it into scale.
Do you see this, I mean, since you're in the research community, do you see this part of the task that you're doing or engaging with? I mean, to bring sort of innovative regulatory regimes and policy into the equation, or is there any activities happening in the European scale to look at how to say move the governance regime in parallel with the technology regime? Because this is a new technology regime, and we're always faced with the dilemma that the governance regimes are always lagging behind. How do we create that?
Yeah, it's not
balance?
easy. There's no easy answer for that, I think. And now we took it, it's a very serious part of the Heaven project, for example, because all the municipalities are in the project. And also the national governments are in the project. But the thing is that it is on a European scale, of course, it takes even more time to finally get this across. At least in my experience of working almost 10 years in research and development, is that the technology side moves a lot quicker than the implementation side. So I think in order to tackle this problem, you have to show successful projects. So you have to take these municipalities and you have to take the national government with you, and then, but always start out with putting the dot on the horizon also for them, saying, okay, if this works out the way we think it will work, then we need you guys to support this in a policy framework, in a governance framework. So yeah, it's not a definite answer. I cannot tell you how.
No. But at least the message is clear that we do need equal amount of innovation into governance regimes, and the way we bring these type of innovations on the national level, but also across countries. And this is probably my last question to you, Leon, in the sense of what would you recommend for the international communities if there is actors like us that work across countries through collaboration, knowledge and technology? What would be the priorities that the international community could focus on to create a global market for hydrogen as a sustainable fuel for decarbonization of economies?
Yeah. That's also a very good question, Tarek. Thank you. Is that I think you see that a little bit now with these hydrogen valleys that the European Union has introduced, where you look at certain areas where it's somewhat easier or more logical to apply a hydrogen economy first. And also these hydrogen valleys are there's not only one location, it's linked to several locations in the European Union. So in that sense, I think if you can replicate that part where you can, as an international community, also identify places or countries or regimes where it's somewhat more relevant and easier to apply this kind of technology, I think that's already a big step ahead. And that we should learn from each other. It's not a race. We should not be in competition with who has the first successful project, but more that we can, open up that once something works out really well in a different project in a different location, that data is available and that we can learn from that part.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I can also see.
Yeah.
I can also see a need for more concerted efforts on standards, setting standards, and defining the kind of safeguards and regulatory variables that would govern sort of the transition, to say. And that's where a lot of learning can happen, huh?
Yeah, maybe also to add to that is that you have to look at the specific area and the specific needs of that country or that region. Because our aim is decarbonization. So we basically want to make sure that the energy mix is decarbonized. Then hydrogen isn't an excellent option for most of these things, but you really have to look at, okay, what is my first low-hanging fruit to start with? And how can I put in all the technologies, all the ideas that are available so I can get as cost-effective as possible to the final goal, which is decarbonization of the energy mix.
Mindful of the time limitation we have for the session, I want to use the last few minutes in terms of opportunity for final words from both Rebecca and Charlie on what can we do, at least on the side of the international community, where development actors like us, a UN agency, how can we facilitate countries' effort towards scale up of hydrogen? What role can we play? What advice would you give international multi-stakeholder, multilateral actor like ours?
Well, from my point of view, the awareness really is something that is now starting. It's a whole range of stakeholders, including the supply chain. They're going to be the ones that deliver this. It's not going to be delivered by people in high organizations. It has to be delivered on the ground from companies, from firms, from individuals. So if you engage with them, and I think that's what you were just hinting at there, Tarek, that we need to engage. It can't just be a series of experts talking to each other, saying how wonderful this opportunity is. It's got to mean something. I think that is happening. I think policies on the move to net zero. Rebecca mentioned the circular principles that are widely adopted in offshore wind, for example, they're routine, but that's not the case elsewhere. But there are hopes now with a bit of stick and a bit of carrot. There is still an argument as to who pays for all of this. That's not really been addressed by the it's not necessarily going to be cheap, certainly not in the early years, but we're in a post-pandemic world anyway. Perhaps it represents an opportunity as much as a cost threat there. But I'd like to see engagement. I'd like to see people going down and talking to the chambers of commerce, as I do, talking to businesses, to small, medium enterprises, to people, single traders with a van. Are they aware that there's different ways diesel might be on its way out? Are they aware of that? Have they thought before they make major purchasing decisions? There's something better. Is there an option for decarbonising construction sites? Is there a fuel cell option for conferences? Aviation is an industry that's not perhaps in the low-hanging fruit category, but is certainly in the longer run. So all these stakeholders, if they're aware of it, they're reading of it, and they are aware of climate change, my word, and they want to do their bit as well. So the more engagement, as I see, with people on the ground, the better. So the more, the better for me.
Thank you, Charlie. Rebecca?
Yeah, I hate to feel like, it seems like me and Charlie are, working together on this, different hemispheres and so forth. But really the awareness on the benefits. We didn't state this in advance, Tarek. And I think I'm coming from a developing country point of view. You know, we have a youth bulge, we have unemployment, and I think if we're able to articulate the benefits clearly towards the jobs for youth, I think you would have people falling over to really make a plan for implementation. And also, I think in terms of the awareness around benefits, around, you know, I think health has come to the fore. I mean, and I think for us, we talk about greenhouse gas emissions. I know in South Africa, for like the Mpumalanga priority area, it's air quality, you know, and so forth. So can we, you know, really get those hard to abate sectors, like in areas like where you have bad air quality is because you have a lot of industrial facilities. So can you take hard to abate areas, use hydrogen as a lever for cleaning that area, but then still keeping the industry facilities in that area for jobs, I think, and increase the green jobs around green chemicals and so forth. And then last but not least, I think if you can use, if you can, even in these very difficult times, still fund innovation to the point where the cost of the technologies come down. Like I think I always love going to meetings where the Japanese government speaks, because they always give this the targets around the cost of green hydrogen. They'll say something like $2 I forgot the TCFs and so forth. Everyone's eyes light up like, but that's really what you have to do. If I'm at a pump and I want to fill my car with petrol or gas or hydrogen, if the cost is the same, then it's
yeah, absolutely.
So let's fund the innovation and work together so we can bring the cost of the technologies down. And then things will move, I believe.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, Charlie, and thank you, Leon. I think you have given us very pointed and relevant directions and guidance, at least on some of the key issues. And I take your message to heart with the issue of engagement, awareness, especially at the demand side, making sure that the potential opportunities on the end use side are clearly visible and clearly articulated. And of course, not to forget the issue of continuously funding and supporting innovation on this space. We came to the end of our time for this session. I want to thank you again on behalf of the Global Manufacturing and Industrialization Summit for your time, engagement, and support to the topic of hydrogen, a pathway for energy transition and decarbonization of industry. With this, please join me in thanking our panelists, Rebecca, Charlie, and Leo. Thank you very much.